In the previous video, I spoke about the historical context Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels lived in, and Marx's early life. One thing I mentioned was materialism. However, I didn't really explain the term in that video, so I thought I'd talk about it now. Let us begin. If you tell someone about your dreams of a socialist utopia, they may call you an idealist. This meaning a visionary and impractical person, or something along the lines of that. However, in a philosophical context, the words idealist and idealism mean other things. Idealism is defined differently in different textbooks and encyclopedias, but generally, there are two different fundamental concepts of idealism, definitions from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. 1. Something mental, the mind, spirit, reason, will, is the ultimate foundation of all reality, and 2. Although the existence of something independent of the mind is recognized, everything that we can know about this mind-independent reality is held to be so permeated by the creative, formative, or constructive activities of the mind, of some kind or other, that all claims to knowledge must be considered, in some sense, to be a form of self-knowledge, knowledge of oneself, that is. The first of these concepts of idealism is called ontological idealism. Ontology is the study of the nature of being, existence, and reality. One philosopher strongly associated with this idea of idealism is the English philosopher George Berkeley, although he did not call himself an idealist. The second idea of idealism is known as epistemological idealism. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy dealing with the nature of knowledge. This form of idealism is associated with the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Idealism is often contrasted to materialism, another philosophical tradition, while ontological idealism holds that something mental, the mind, spirit, reason, will, is the ultimate foundation of all reality. Materialism is often described as the idea that everything is physical. The idea that all idealism is immaterialist, the rejection of the physical world altogether, is, however, wrong. In the German tradition, idealism was understood differently. The Germans accepted that ideas were real, that ideas were objective. However, they did not reject the idea of the reality of matter altogether, like Berkeley did. In the previous episode, I mentioned Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He was a German philosopher who lived between 1717 to 1831. Hegel was, like Berkeley, an idealist. Hegel's idealism was different from Berkeley's. You could describe his idealism as a form of objective idealism, which is basically a term used in contrast to Berkeley's subjective idealism. Berkeley did, as I mentioned earlier, reject the idea of a material reality existing outside of the subjective mind. Objective idealism accepts that the idea of a material reality existing outside of the subjective mind, but rejects the idea that the mind has emerged from material things. Hegel believed, in short, that all things, phenomena, were individual aspects of the spirit. I'll provide a quote from Hegel's concept of Geist. Geist simply means spirit. What clearly emerges from Hegel's writings is that Geist refers to some sort of general consciousness, a single mind common to all men. The entire sweep of the phenomenology of spirit is away from the disharmonious conceptions of men as individuals to the absolute conception of all men as one. This is what I meant by the spirit in all things phenomena were individual aspects of the spirit. This spirit that Hegel speaks of is not constant by any means. Instead, it develops organically through history. To understand how Hegel believes the spirit evolves, you have to understand his concept of the dialectic. Dialectic can be said to simply be a way of thinking about the world. This Wikipedia quote sums it up nicely. A thesis, giving rise to its reaction, an antithesis, which contradicts or negates this thesis, and the tension between the two being resolved by means of a synthesis. This can be seen in contrast to the perhaps more traditional view of how we find the truth in a certain situation, in which one argument is presented, and then a counter-argument to that argument negates the first argument, which excludes the process of synthesis. You could see his dialectic as a sort of spiral, in that nothing is destroyed or lost, but simply raised up. This is known as sublation. You could explain the term sublation as being overcoming and preserving at the same time. This is why Hegel believes that the spirit develops dialectically, i.e., through this process of sublation I just described. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that Hegel's idealism was better described as an objective idealism. This is because Hegel saw the objective world as simply the spirit, objectified, or as I expressed it earlier, that all things phenomena are individual aspects of the spirit. Hegel's idealism is not usually described as objective idealism, but instead as absolute idealism, due to his idea of the whole or the absolute. Now that we have established some of Hegel's philosophy, we can finally move on to Marx. When Hegel died, he was by far the biggest philosopher in Germany. I spoke in my last episode about the young Hegelians, the left-leaning followers of Hegel. There were also conservative interpretations of his works. Marx was first introduced to the young Hegelians while studying in Berlin, and in Paris to the works of Ludwig Feuerbach, another young Hegelian. Feuerbach's philosophy was materialist. Materialism, as opposed to idealism, can be summarized like this: the fundamental substance of nature is matter. Feuerbach believed in this. He thought only the physical world was real. Marx was not entirely satisfied with Feuerbach's materialism, however. Marx thought that he ignored the role the human subject plays in creating the world we perceive. Marx's critique of Feuerbach's materialism can be seen as a sort of synthesis between Hegel's view of the active nature of the human subject and Feuerbach's materialist core. So, human beings actively change and transform the world they perceive, but this change comes from actual material activity, not through the spreading of abstract ideas from philosophers, like Feuerbach thought was the case. Here's a quote from the Holy Family from 1845, which nicely sums up Marx's critique of Hegel's philosophy of history. Hegel's philosophy is nothing but the philosophical expression of the Christian Germanic dogma concerning the contradiction between spirit and matter, God and the world. Hegel's philosophy of history presupposes an abstract or absolute spirit, which develops in such a way that mankind is only a mass which carries this spirit, consciously or unconsciously. Hegel assumes that a speculative, esoterical history precedes and underlies empirical history. The history of mankind is transformed into the history of the abstract spirit of mankind, which transcends the real man. I've mentioned one area where Marx was influenced by Hegel in. I've skipped over perhaps the most important thing Marx got from Hegel, the dialectical view of history. While yes, Hegel applied the dialectical view of history in his idea of the spirit as a general consciousness common to all men, and Marx refuted this idea of the spirit, seeing as he thought ideas to be created by matter. He still adopted the dialectical method. What Marx did was that he applied the dialectical method on human history, but instead of looking at ideas and such, he looked at the material conditions of men. This way of looking at history has been called historical materialism. Marx never used the term to describe his own view of history, but it will do for now. I could continue on explaining his theory, but I think it's best to just provide some quotes from Marx himself. This one is from the German Ideology, never published under Marx's lifetime, and it basically shows his view of the active human subject and the basis of his analysis of history. The first premise of all of human history is, of course, the existence of living human individuals. Thus, the first fact to be established is the physical organization of these individuals and their consequent relation to the rest of nature. Of course, we cannot here go either into the actual physical nature of man or into the natural conditions in which man finds himself, geological, climatic, and so on. The writing of history must always set out from these natural bases and their modification in the course of history through the action of man. Men can be distinguished from animals by consciousness, by religion, or anything else you like. They themselves begin to produce their means of subsistence, a step which is conditioned by their physical organization. By producing their means of subsistence, men are indirectly producing their actual material life. Marx means by this that man makes his own history. This is due to man's relationship to nature. By changing it, he transforms himself. The second quote is also from the German Ideology, and it explains the relationship humans have to production. The way in which men produce their means of subsistence depends first of all on the nature of the actual means they find in existence and have to reproduce. This mode of production must not be considered simply as being the reproduction of the physical existence of the individuals. Rather, it is a definite form of activity on these individuals, a definite form of expressing their life, a definite mode of life on their part. As individuals express their life, so they are. What they are, therefore, coincides with their production, both with what they produce and with how they produce. The nature of individuals thus depends on the material conditions determining their production. What Marx is saying here is basically the same as in the first quote, but he elaborates on it. He is saying that man only becomes man through production, and due to the fact that man becomes man through production, the nature of a particular mode of production directly impacts the nature of the individuals in this particular mode of production. This relationship between the material conditions in a particular society and the nature of the individuals in it is often modeled as a form of base and superstructure, where the base is the economy, the mode of production, and the superstructure is everything that is created by the individuals in any particular mode of production. That includes everything from art to philosophy to law. Now, how does the mode of production change from one to another? Due to contradictions that arise within the mode of production that have to be resolved. The spiral continues, so to speak. That's all for this video. I hope you liked it and that it wasn't too hard to follow along with. In the next video, I'll talk about something else related to Marxism.